ko te WHAIORA, ko Rotorua, ko te marae e takotora, ko kōtua kurangatira ko Paine, Tamati, Trevor, Sione, kia koutou ngā tāngata whenua, te aroa whānui. Koutou katoa, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Such a privilege to follow after Tamati, te ihi, te wehi, me te wana, and to hear straight from the heart of Tūhoe about some of the issues that we're addressing in this wider conference. WHAIORA, the search for well-being. In the wake of the shootings at the mosques in Christchurch, New Zealanders shuddered in horror. The images of worshippers carried away on stretchers or lying in their own blood, the anguish of their families, the courage and suffering of the survivors evoked aroha, fellow feeling and pain. It felt like a brutal, unprovoked attack, not just on the Muslim community, but on the whole country. The price of bigotry and hatred was there for all to see. In our small, intimate society, New Zealanders quite often pride themselves on tolerance and empathy for others. In the wake of this tragedy, they reached out to the Muslim community with flowers, donations, cards, messages, candles, vigils, and other gestures of fellow feeling. Haka, performed in their honour by Muslim school children. Hijabs worn by non-Muslim women, including the Prime Minister, hugs, tears, songs, and prayer. And in return, the Muslim leaders, young and old, showed an extraordinary generosity of spirit, thanking the country that harboured the shooter, where he purchased and mastered his weapons for this heartwarming response. At the same time, there's been soul-searching. In Māori, one might say that the killings at Christchurch were a patu wairua, a blow to the spirit, to individuals and the wider community. Kiwis have been asking, how could this happen? Where did this hatred come from? Peering into the dark nooks and crannies of our country and into our colonial past, we've seen that in one way or another, it's always been amongst us. But out of this scrutiny is emerging, I think, a determination to drive out racism, hatred, fear of others, to drive these things out of our future. And in a time of collective grief, Muslim voices have spoken as never before, chanting, praying, and sharing their thoughts about the catastrophe that came upon them. In the media, in Parliament, in services and vigils, speaking about peace and forgiveness. It's also been quite extraordinary to see how often New Zealanders from all backgrounds have reached out for Māori ideas. Of aroha, love, fellow feeling towards others, manaakitanga, kindness, welcome to others, and whānau, the idea of family that Tamati's just been speaking about, of kinship. Haka, songs in Māori, to express themselves. This has even been true of the Muslim community. For instance, Dr. Mustafa Farouk, President of the Islamic Associations of New Zealand, who at the Christchurch Memorial Service ended his speech by saying, aroha, 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 kia ko tahi tātou, love, 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 may we all be one. So right now, people in this country are reflecting and talking perhaps as never before, about the kaupapa that we're talking about this morning and in this conference, how to build effective, accountable and inclusive governance at all levels that promotes peace, justice and respect of human rights. But here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, we might like to reframe that question. Given the heart-rending and apocalyptic challenges that we're all facing, as New Zealanders and as people on this planet, effective, accountable and inclusive governance sounds heartless and mechanistic, a long way from organising our affairs in ways that foster aroha, love and fellow feeling, kotahitanga, the links that bind us together, rather than hatred and division. If we want aroha, if we search for manaakitanga, if we're looking for kotahitanga, coming together, I think maybe we need to be looking for philosophies that are more rather than less likely to generate these kinds of ways of being. Because they're not ideas, they're ways of living, they're ways of being, as Tamati has just been articulating. And here in Aotearoa, New Zealanders are exploring Māori and Pacifica ancestral legacies as a source, with the leadership of people like Tamati. So many leaders that we're blessed to have in our country, in this nation, the people who have led the idea of the urewera as a person, the Whanganui River as an ancestor. And this is a conference about health promotion and education. The idea of ora, health, prosperity and well-being springs to mind. A notion that applies to individuals, to families, to communities, to ecosystems, to rivers, to mountains, to the sea, even the nation and the planet. And its converse mate, which is sickness, state of ill-being, misfortune, also confronts us on a daily basis. And again, Tamati's spoken about that from the heart. He spoke truth to us about that today. Shows up in high rates of illness and mortality, youth suicide, high rates of incarceration, dysfunctional families and communities, collapsing ecosystems, species dying out at an unprecedented rate, 4,000 species in Aotearoa alone at risk of extinction, and biofiscal systems that are collapsing, causing widespread damage and potential catastrophe for us all. An event like the Christchurch shootings, in which one man could spend and spread ill will like a toxin, is a classic case of mate in action. As I understand them, ora and mate are straightforward ideas. In a state of order, the relationships between people and among people, and between people and other life forms, whether rivers, whether te urewera, whether Aotearoa, whether Hinemoana, Papatuanuku, whether the planet, are in a state of positive balance, generating peace and prosperity and well-being. But in a state of mate, which is what I think we're in far too often at the moment, the relations among people and between people are out of kilter, and between people and other life forms, generating violence and poverty, a sense of security and alienation. Exchanges are negative and unequal. Reciprocity has failed. These ideas are also very profound, rooted in the origins of the cosmos. And I'm thinking here of my own mentor and teacher, Edwina Sterling, who was trained in the old ways of the old schools of learning. I was brought here this morning, brought over by the daughter of Lima Edwards, who was another person that was trained in that way in the old wānanga system. According to those experts, the world began with a surge of energy, followed by knowledge and thought and memory, rough translations for the Māori, and eons of darkness to Paul. And it wasn't until the WHAIORA, the breath of the wind, the breath of life, WHAIORA, Hau, the wind, the breath of the cosmos, Ora, the life force, Hau tupu, the breath, the life of growth and expansion, the winds of life and growth, blew through the void that Rangi and Papa, Rangi Nui and Papa Tuanuka, the sky and the earth could emerge, followed by stars, plants, animals, and as Tamati said, last of all, people. Here the world is animated by the winds of life and growth, the hau, that blows through everything, that animates all forms of life. People are just one element in these cosmic networks, or whakapapa, these networks of kinship, embracing all forms of life. And it's driven by reciprocal exchanges backwards and forwards among complementary pairs. Rangi and Papa, earth and sky, men and women, land and water, for example. One living system, one great kin network, one shared source of life. And these life forms, in this way of understanding reality, include phenomena that in common sense Western thought are considered to be inanimate. The rivers, the mountains, the fish, the birds, the plants, and the ocean. Peter Hurinui Jones, one of the great tribal scholars of Tainui, once said that the double spiral represents these cosmological charms that are like song lines in wood, unfurling the world, chanting the different epochs as reality emerges and takes shape. From nothingness was generated unpossessed nothingness, unbound nothingness. Of course, this is a translation. The wind of growth, the wind of life, stayed in clear space and the atmosphere emerged. The sky, tarangi, that floats above the earth, te whenua. And just as the wind of life brings the world into existence, it brings life to each child in kinship with others. And in this wānanga way of thinking about reality, as a baby is born, they emerge from te pō, the dark invisible realm of ancestors, into te ao marama, the world of light, and that same te hei moriora, often said to a child as it's born. The spirit of life, they sneeze, they cry, and the spirit of life is within them. And they come into te ao marama, the everyday world of light that we all inhabit. And this phrase, te hei moriora, Tamati began his kōrero with it. It's often heard today on the marae, when people are giving speeches. It's reflected in the hungi when people press noses, mingling the breath of life together. And increasingly, as Tamati was saying, Kiwis greet themselves, each other, with kia ora, kia ora. It used to be that telephone operators, famously some years back, a telephone operator who used that phrase was sacked. And now people just use it on a daily basis. Let there be life. Kia ora. And in this way of thinking, the wairua, or spirit, gives life to the physical body, the tinana. And each person has a hinengaro, a mind-heart. The mind and the heart are not separate, in which thought and feeling intermingle. And as the living face, the kanawiora of ancestors' children are vital to the continuity of the descent lines and the well-being of kin groups. And in the old days, if you read the accounts of the early first European visitors and explorers, they talk about the way in which children were cherished, from their vantage point spoiled. Those accounts, and they are multiple, talk about the way fathers carried their babies around with them. Our children of 4 years old would attend a gathering, be able to ask a question of the old people and be answered. That children were cherished, they weren't struck. And this is contrary to popular opinion. You often have people today saying that, talking about warrior genes and this kind of thing. This is contradicted by all of the evidence that we have of that early time. And the presence of things like child abuse in some families today testifies to the collapse of a philosophy and a whole way of being, this whole idea of taking care of the ora, the WHAIORA of a child, cherishing it, letting it grow, letting it flourish, letting them be everything they can be in te ao marama. And again, in that philosophy, it's understood that the health and well-being of people, of the land and of the ocean are completely mutually implicated. So the most senior tohunga, the ones that were trained in the old schools of learning, the wānanga, would conduct the seasonal ritual cycle which protected the fertility of people, plants, animals, fish, life in the ocean, life in the ngahebe in the bush, life in the whenua in the land. And there was feasting and exchange of gifts, mutual generosity, with mana being how much you can give, not how much you can take, and how much you can have for yourself. And there was dancing and feasting and sports and music, and I think, again, thinking of the things that Tamati's been talking about, that Tūhoe is doing, bringing that back for the young people so that they can have that ihi, that wihi, that wana, that sense of wonderment and excitement and thrill of the joy and the excitement of life. And I think in Aotearoa, when the kohanga reo, the language nests were established, and the Māori language was taught by old people, in many cases to children, babies, and then to primary school children, and then to children in high school, and now in the wharewa and the universities. A whole way of being goes with that. And a lot of the young people now who are fluent in te reo have had it since they were babies. You know, Tūhoe, that's always been the case. Lots of other parts in the country, the language had been strapped out of them. And yesterday, floating in a boat on the Waikato River with a young waka expert who'd been trained by the old people, listening to him talk about how he feels and how his people feel about that river. It was just so beautiful. His sight was clear, as Edwina would have said, "Kia mara mataku titiro, let my sight be clear." His sight was clear, his wairua was unclouded, and he was able to speak poetry about how he feels and his people feel about the Waikato River. So in this state of order, life is peaceful, and there's lots of kai. Mana's high, and the relationship with individuals, with kinfolk, with other groups, with ancestors, is in good heart. Body, spirit, and mind-heart are all in balance, giving health and well-being for individuals, for families, for groups, for the land, for the sea, for the ocean. But a state of mate, and again, let's not kid ourselves. That's part of our present as well, very, very deeply so, where relationships are out of balance, where life is dangerous, where food is scarce, children going to school without food in their stomachs. Manas are in decline rather than flourishing, and people are suffering, ill and dying. So the health statistics in New Zealand for Māori and Pacifica people, for example, so much still to do. And when a person or a group is hurt or humiliated, you know, racism is just it's a kind of a bad, it's not a very good word because it doesn't really express what happens. patu wairua, when somebody says something mean to a little kid on their first day at school that makes them feel ashamed of being Māori, for example. A defenceless small child who hits that side of the world for the first time and is a patu wairua. Racism doesn't really capture it, it's kind of clinical as a term. It doesn't really tell about the hurt and harm that this causes, I think. And so, at the Waitangi hearings for the plenary river, for example, an elder lamented. He said, "It's with huge sadness that we observe dead tuna, eels, and trout along the banks of our Aotearoa, our ancestral river, our river that comes from the ancestral dimension, the ball. The only thing that's in a state of growth is the algae and slime. Our river is stagnant and dying. The great river flows from the gathering of the mountains to the sea. I am the river, and the river is me. If I am the river, and the river is me, then emphatically, I am dying. Aotearoa, ko te awa koau, ke te mate te awa, ke te mate ahau. If the river's dying, so am I. And when people talk like that, many other New Zealanders think they're being metaphorical or poetic, until something happens like Havelock North, and the whole community gets sick because their water supply is polluted, and the rate of waterborne diseases in Aotearoa. Our mate, so are we. It's true, it's not poetry, it's reality, it's public health. And here there's no division between mind and matter, or mind and heart, or individuals and that kin network of relationships with other forms of life. This is a relational theory of how reality works. And this is quite different, I think, from those modernist medical theories that separate out mind, body, heart and spirit, culture from nature, and people from the environment. In these kinds of philosophies, the body's understood as a material system, to be treated by physical and mechanical interventions, medicine, surgery, manipulations, drugs and the like. Although, of course, this is changing. While the mind is understood as an immaterial system to be grasped by psychology or psychoanalysis, neurology and neuroscience, the heart or emotions are something of an anomaly in the system, while the spirit is largely ignored. And because of these divisions, many scholars have been tempted to argue that Western ideas about health are fundamentally mechanistic, based on binary oppositions between mind and matter, intellect and the cosmos, observer and observed, nature and culture. But for those of us that are interested in contemporary science, we'll recognise that these kinds of binary oppositions are based on old dead science. Mind versus matter, think of neuroscience. Subject versus objects, think of quantum physics. Nature versus culture, people versus the environment, think of all the environmental sciences. These are old, dead science. And the interesting thing is that when the first European vessels arrived 250 years ago, almost, in October this year, the Enlightenment was in full swing in Europe. And there was a flurry of innovation going on in philosophy and science and industry and commerce. And those ships brought with them a cargo of colliding cosmologies. It wasn't all mechanistic. Thank goodness. So some of the first voyages to arrive were scientific expeditions, like this one, led by James Cook at the cutting edge of the Enlightenment. And on those ships, the best observers had medical training, which is interesting. At that time, the medical students in London, in Edinburgh, in Montpellier and Leiden were taught to observe and describe plants, landscapes, animals, and climates as well as people and their diseases, and to reflect upon the relationships among them. The kind of training that people got was often in botanical gardens, for example, as well as in physics and climate and zoology, people were seen as part of these wider living systems. So somebody like William Monkhouse on board the Endeavour arrived almost 250 years ago. Their journals are full of very, very rich description of everything they saw, pretty much. It's only the things they could see, because they couldn't speak Māori. They didn't understand that, although on board we also had WHAIORA, the high priest navigator from Aotearoa, who could speak with Māori. So those first expeditions were not purely European, that one wasn't. He was a great tuhunga in the schools of learning at Taputapuatea in Aotearoa, a homeland of Māori. And the interesting thing about that is that that very first expedition that came ashore had these people that were trained in medicine of that time, which, as I say, talked about the web of life, thought about these interconnected relationships, but also to Pai, our high priest navigator, star navigator from the homeland. And at that time, people like Erasmus Darwin, who wrote about the loves of plants, Joseph Priestley, many of those in the Scottish Enlightenment, the Comte du Buffon in France, and the Humboldt brothers in Germany, for example, Benjamin Franklin in the United States. They understood the universe as made up of complementary forces and elements linked in complex networks of relations. Sounds very like whakapapa, actually. It's not the same, but it resonates. Striving towards equilibrium. And that set of ideas, what I call the order of relations in the Enlightenment, that particular legacy, that strand, led to the emancipation of slaves, increased freedom for women, participatory democracy, evolutionary theory. And you can see it today, the environmental sciences, you can see it today in the science of complex networks, and systems like the World Wide Web, ideas of large biological systems, human beings as symbiotes, as living communities of organisms, not as individuals. But by way of contrast with this, and this is where the mechanistic model comes in, so the order of relations, that whole legacy from the Enlightenment, you could say, resonates with Māori and Pacifica philosophies. This great web of life, interconnected, reciprocal relations, striving for equilibrium. But on the other hand, on board the same ship, there was a different philosophy which emerged. And this was about what you could call, following Michel Foucault, the order of things. And this is based on the separation of subject from object, culture from nature, people from the environment. The idea of the cosmos as a machine, and the body as a machine, made up of distinct, divisible, replicable and replaceable working parts. Another idea was the idea of the grid, Linnaean taxonomy, sorting all the plants and ultimately the animals, and then later on people as well, into categories. The different species, binomial taxonomy, but equally that went eventually into categorizing human beings. And it's where this kind of idea of white supremacy comes from, the idea of categories that strive to be pure. It's a dangerous idea in many ways. That's a contemporary artist's take on the order of things. The grid is a method of surveillance with the panopticon. Contemporary, our Outlook calendars, the way we grid our days, the way we grid our money, the way we grid our buildings. Censuses were invented at this time. Surveys, the land was cut up into blocks. Gridded bureaucratic systems that lead to siloed thinking today in our government departments, this department, that department, health separated from education, separated from whatever, the siloed thinking that goes with it, and industry, replicable mechanical processes. And medicine, it led to these biomedical models that split subject from object, mind from matter, thought from the emotions, fragmenting the body into a series of parts that can be treated by specialists, rather than a living system embedded in many others, which is the way whakapapa would have it. You know, as a person, we are already a system, a living system of many different organisms. We're a symbiote, embedded in our families, embedded in our communities, embedded in our countries, embedded in the planet. And sometimes, at that time too, and this is an idea that I wish we could put into the dustbin of history, the great chain of being, the grid was made a hierarchy. And with God at the top, the archangels and angels coming down to the divine king, the ranks of the aristocrats, the ranks of the commoners. Then you had barbarians. Māori fitted into that category because they cultivated the soil. Savages, the Australian Aboriginals were put there. Sentient animals, non-sentient animals, plants, you know, insects, rocks. So Papatuanuku, rather than being the mother of us all, is right at the bottom of the great chain of being. And in this model of the cosmos, everything at the bottom of the great chain has to offer up tribute to everything higher up. Men over women, adults over children. And it's the origin of many of our contemporary structures as well. It led to Europeans thinking that as a so-called higher form of life. This is where the hurt of colonisation received so much of its justification, if you like. Europeans as civilised people were supposed to be a higher form of life, more progressive than Māori. So they were entitled to rule over Māori and take their land from them. And over nature as well. Grid the land, sell it, make it an object. Use it, rather than live with it and let it take care of you. So I think this model here is the idea of the origin of ideas of white supremacy. It's the idea, the origin of many ideas about gender relations in the West. It's also the origin of many ideas about our relationships with the wider living world around us. When we talk about resource management, it's humans managing the environment, people above the environment managing it. We talk about ecosystem services, it's nature offering itself up to human control. But it's not the way it is. These are old myths. It's a mythic idea and not a helpful one. So here I think as we move towards what's been going on in this country in recent times, we've come to an extreme form of this kind of fragmentation. Tamaji talked about individualism, of these very fragmented habits of mind. We've taken our hospitals, our schools, our universities and vital infrastructure and tried to turn them into businesses with the people that we should be looking after and cherishing as clients or customers. We expect them to make a profit. Governance underpinned by these habits of mind will always struggle to deliver peace, justice and respect to others, for others, let alone healthy, thriving communities, whether human or non-human. The fundamental logic of them drives against these kinds of outcomes. And I think what we see in our country at the moment is a revulsion against that, against this fragmented, cost-calculating, individualistic approach to social life. And a turn towards older Western ideas of individual and collective responsibility, the politics of kindness, for example, compassion, truth, justice. And also picking up Māori and Pacifica ideas of kaitiakitanga, manaakitanga, looking after, taking care, hospitality, welcome, and aroha as a fundamental philosophy and way of being. So we're trying now, for the first time in the world, I think, a well-being budget. But if you look at it, it's still got its boxes, it's still got its silos. Human, social, natural, financial and physical capital. It's still got the order of things in there, its gridded structures. But at the same time, they are trying to weave those together, to break down silos in government, to think about long-term order, long-term health, long-term well-being for our children, our grandchildren, for future generations, for the living world around us. While the killings in Christchurch were a heart-stopping horror, they've made us re-examine our own habits of mind and to defy the emissaries of hatred and their mindless echo chambers. Even more than changing gun laws and outlawing hate speech, it will be everyday acts of bravery and kindness, of aroha, that make this a living reality, taking our land and our people into a state of order. Listen to the voice of Papatuanuku, the Earth Mother. Piki mai, kake mai, ho mai te WHAIORA kia hau, kia tū te huanga te moe a te kuia te pō, kāpō, kāo, kawatea. Climb here, draw near, bring me the water of life. The sleep of this old woman has been disturbed in the night, but the dawn has come. It is day. It is light. Kia ora.